welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Looking forward to us kicking off in just a minute here. Today's discussion is about becoming a master of disaster recovery, and we've got quite the crew here to discuss it. Looks like we have 50 plus people in the room today, so very excited to talk about disaster recovery in here. We'll give 30 seconds to a minute just to let a few more people into the room. As always, just a little bit of housekeeping. We do have an open chat policy, meaning ask us questions at any time in here. We welcome them. We want to discuss backup and DR strategies, and we want you really to be a master in here. Before something happens or prior to ever needing to require that DR plan, we want to have one in place. So with that, just let me just see if there's anyone else in here in the lobby that we need to let in, and we'll kick it off. Okie dokie. Who's Virtual Graffiti? Why does this matter? Virtual Graffiti is your online cyber partner here. We currently operate 50 plus different unique cyber stores, and we specialize in selling to commercial market, government, end users, anyone who really needs any IT or infrastructure solution. We recently launched a brand new cyber store here called Cloud Data Protect, and that is to help educate you on some of Enable's products in the market. The panel today consists of myself, obviously as COO and General Manager here at Virtual Graffiti. We have Elias joining us from Enable. Welcome, Elias, handling any of the sales side of things. Elias, I think you moved here from Canada with Enable. Is that correct?
That's right.
Fantastic. And then we have Thomas joining, who is one of the lead solutions engineers here at Enable as well. Thomas, you have quite a bit of knowledge managing customer environments and backups, don't you?
More experience than you'd like doing restores and such in a pinch. But I have several years of experience in managed services generally, which just means IT, but on more environments. So
fantastic. How many servers do you reckon you've recovered here in the course of your lifetime?
In the course of my lifetime, probably a lot if you were talking about tests and things, but in real emergency recoveries, 5 or 6, something like that, under my care, that would have caused very serious business problems if they'd stared down much longer. Yeah, 5 or 6. Okay.
And look, I'm excited to talk today about Cove, y'all's product offering here for backup and DR. It's quite a unique one in here. So, looking forward to jumping into a demo of it here slightly. But before we do that, we'll talk about the solution for just a few minutes. And I think first things first, though, we have a bit of a poll for everyone. So similar to that question I just asked you, guys, if you want to answer in the chat here, have you ever recovered a server? Please let us know, just so we have an idea. Give a minute for responses.
Yeah, we got some capitalized yeses. I think we've triggered some flashbacks. Probably unpleasant memories flowing through some people's heads right now.
We've got a no. Another yes.
A lucky man in the audience. Yeah.
The next question should be: have you recovered a server from a tape backup?
Yeah. That's just a proxy for age. It's rude to ask.
All right, a few yeses, a few nos in here. A lot of yeses, I'm sure. So quite a few recoveries in here, Thomas, that we've seen.
Yeah.
All right, so when the phone rings, who's ready? That's the real question here. When I first started selling backup and DR solutions, recovery looked a lot different than it does today. Look, we didn't have ransomware. wasn't nearly the problem that it
Yeah.
is today in here. I'm sure it's changed for you as well, Thomas.
Oh yeah, yeah. I still remember when security didn't really matter. It was a much happier time. But yes, ransomware became a very big thing in very short order.
Yeah, I mean, like backup was the security strategy
Yes,
back, you know.
exactly.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah. It was a very different landscape, and yeah, the vast majority of them boiled down to people just deleted files, and you needed to get them back, and they were simple, and you can see sort of the failure modes there, right? Where those lost data and hardware failures were probably a little more common back then. They really made up the bulk of it. And we didn't really think about site recovery as much, though I guess that depended on the scale of industry you were in. Um, because you often just didn't have the resources to do the redundancy that was needed to think in those terms. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Especially for the smaller customers without the disaster recovery sites,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, you couldn't
This is long. Go ahead.
and pre everything being a VM too, right? There's quite a big difference between you telling me you need 2 VMs on a hypervisor somewhere else, and you telling me you've got two massive Dell servers that cost you 20 grand each that have died, and you need to get it back somewhere, or you need those jobs happening somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's changed. It's changed so much in even the last, I'd say 3 years, even compared to 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I first started looking at backup on DR solutions. So talk to me about cyber recovery today.
Yeah,
You know,
so the reason we sort of list those out the way we have there, right? Which is, I assume given the number of yeses here, we've just got like, frankly, a lot of engineers or people who did engineering work on the call, which is good. And one thing I often think of it as is like those first three, right? They're obviously still important, and they are just the way we used to think about things, right? People still just manage to delete files they shouldn't do, and we need to get them back, and we need to get them back generally pretty fast. Hardware does die. I know a lot of people have moved off-prem, so that's less of a problem. But hardware dies, and we need to get that back. And site recoveries, where a blackout takes out one of your offices and you need to get that workload spun up in the other office, all of those things still happen. And frankly, us engineers, we're a bit like firefighters, right? Almost on instinct, we can kick in the door and get you guys back up and running in fairly short order. But with the way things have changed, right, it's become a lot more important to start thinking about things like, cyber insurance. Did that really exist, 10 years ago in nearly the same scale as it does now? No, but that adds a whole new layer of complexity where we need to sort of be preserving a crime scene, right? If we're going to need to make a claim, we can't just sort of say everything's fine now, we deleted everything. There's a whole lot of extra things and steps that go into, above and beyond just getting people back up and running. And it's way more important where, on those first three, again, a lot of us, I assume, are pretty good engineers. We can probably wing it and get you back up and running in pretty short order. But for these more modern sort of recoveries, we really do need to have a plan going in, or you won't just be able to come up with the answer on the spot, right?
it, that incident response plan, having it pre-written in the moment of this modern disaster, which we'll touch on in a minute, is super important because otherwise you're kind of running around like a chicken with its head cut off in here.
Exactly.
And like
Yeah.
it look, you might have to deploy a whole new network firewall. You might have to go deploy all new switching infrastructure in here, right? How do you source this on the fly in here? Knowing who to call, who can go find you stock. So these are all problems that you're going to have on the day of if the worst does happen in here. So having this pre-written in case maybe the IT manager's not there or on holiday, or it's the COO of that company having to run the DR plan. It's pre-written and anyone can follow the step-by-step guide in here.
Yeah, absolutely. Writing this stuff down. I mean, writing it down is very important, but just having the plan, right? You won't come up with the right answers on the spot when you've got three people yelling at you, because nothing's working, right? The whole
And you're
world turns into
unplugging
chaos if
everything.
the Wi-Fi goes down for 30 seconds, let alone, half the infrastructure's down. So you won't be thinking clearly on that day.
Yeah. So we're comparing a lot of old versus new in here. What the new risk, what new skills do I need to have? What are the new risks? So we know ransomware is one of those risks in here. Um, who would you recommend calling? And then Thomas, I'll give some of my recommendations as well.
Who would I recommend calling? So, I mean, you'll notice, what we have sort of these questions of, what you're going to be asking yourself on the day. Always you need to tell the boss, right? And sometimes that comes a lot later than it should. I know it's rough. No one wants to have that conversation. But it's always important to tell the boss. Who do you call or do you look in the phone book? That, who you call does boil down to what type of disaster we've had, right? So if hardware's died, you obviously need to be getting in touch with the hardware vendor, right? Because you're going to need to replace that at some point. But that's probably secondary to calling whoever can restore it, right? So if you're not the engineer who can do the restore, you need to be getting the person who can get you back up and running on the phone pretty fast, right? As well as any other stakeholders. If you take down a sales system, probably the head of sales needs to send out an email to the team saying, hey, look, this service is deprecated for the time being. IT's on it, So stakeholders and anyone who's going to be able to get you the things you need to get back up and running, I guess is the short answer there. What would you say?
Yeah, it comes down to that type of disaster, as you said. If it's a ransomware attack, look, ACSC is always on my short list in here, right? They have some pretty good guidance, especially for SMB customers, and these guys are keen to help as always. Then look, the boss does probably need to get involved, and maybe you need to bring in somebody who is more familiar with incident response plans. Winging it, I generally recommend. There might be a few things in here that might go off script. However, having some instructions ahead of time definitely is a requirement or a need in here.
Yeah.
The recovery site in here. What are most of the customers you're working with? What do their recovery sites look like?
So I mean that really does just span the whole game. Like we've got a little bit of everything. We're a pretty flexible tool. I would say where possible, and I'll probably touch on this in the demo. If you've got on-prem servers, usually it's quite easy to have the redundancy that you can spin up that still on-prem somewhere else. But depending on the workload, Azure, potentially other cloud service providers as well. I might be a little biased here just with the kinds of people I tend to deal with are going to be much more Azure than AWS, for example. But, cloud options are obviously something you should always have in the back of your mind. It's expensive to spin up an Azure VM, but it's a lot cheaper than being down, right? So that should always be something that's on the shortlist ready to go. I'm trying to think. Obviously, when it comes to not clean this is a server that's down workloads. When we're talking about mailbox restores and things, there can also be questions there of like, am I restoring to the original compromised mailbox or to somewhere else, or SharePoint restores? Am I restoring straight back where I was, or am I restoring to somewhere else so I can keep an eye on it and then roll that into production? That's also a little abstract, but definitely something that needs to be considered. I don't know. You would know your partners better than I do. What do you think is going to be sort of the biggest ones here for them?
Look, I think making sure that, and we'll touch on this during probably your demo here. The backup is immutable, right? Meaning it can't be changed. There was no compromise within that backup in here.
Absolutely must have, yeah.
Because if you're just restoring to a backup that was breached or hacked, there's no point of doing the restoration. And here you're like,
I've seen that happen before. Yep.
Yeah, me too, Seth. I mean, like this is where they used to argue tape is immutable to a degree until we found out it wasn't in here. So it's yeah, look at it. the skill set 100% has changed. I see us investing more into the Azure component, as I'm sure a lot of the customers that we work with are. So it's look having these cloud secondary methods for offsite is amazing, really. We just have a question from Jasper in here, Thomas, and I'll ask you, and then I can also have a crack at it. Do you have any pre-made recovery plans or checklists that fit most scenarios?
We do actually have some material like that floating around. I might grab Jasper's email off you after this at some point. But yeah, I know we do actually have some material that has some of those blanks filled in and color in the lines for your specific situation here as well. So I've seen that material floating around. I'd need to go find it. But yeah, we actually do have some stuff like that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm also happy to help tweak any sort of checklist as well to make it more custom tailored for your organization. So, by all means, please don't hesitate to ask for help. So I'll get that list off you, Thomas. We've got some guidelines in here before we jump into the demonstration. We've got Thomas, I'll let you handle. What are your guidelines in here?
Yeah, so look, these are the more modern, versus what you would just do in a pinch back in the day. These are the more modern considerations that a lot of people just haven't thought about. So we still do see people, we've certainly had the case where people sort of see that a VM has been ransomwared, for example, right? And they just delete it and restore over the top of it, essentially, right? Spin it back up from a few days ago or whenever they think it was working. But the problem is almost exactly like you said, right? They've restored something that had ransomware that was sitting there for the last couple of weeks before triggering. So they get ransomware again. And in the end, it's costing quite a lot to the business. But they've destroyed a ton of evidence by nuking that. There's no sort of, I can take this straight to the insurer and say, look, it did get around, the things that I told you I had when I filled out those forms with the insurer. So don't delete the original VM if you can at all avoid it, right? We're all engineers here, right? Sometimes things happen and there's lots of trade-offs everywhere. But a really good rule of thumb is don't delete that original compromised device in any kind of security breakdown, right? This might also apply for non-security incidents, right? Often you want to figure out why it broke, right? You might want to restore that server back to yesterday when it was working, but it might, again, you've got Y2K. It just thinks it's, the end of 1999 sitting there, right? You want to investigate the broken server and figure out why, so you can stop your restored server from breaking in the future. Restoring to a sandbox clean room, that's some fancy terminology for just make sure that wherever you're putting the restored box can't get nuked by the same ransomware that took out the original box. Right? If you're unsure of what vector the ransomware came in from, throwing it straight back on the same VLAN with the exact same firewall rules, with the exact same users using it, is probably not a great idea. I think that's fairly self-explanatory. And look, there is, I'm guessing, probably something like more than half of the people in this room are going to have some kind of cyber insurance. So what are you going to do there, right? Like, are we roping them in? How are we going to go about that? It's something, you'll need to have a think about and have a plan before it happens.
I definitely think isolating in the first case in here is always, first port of call. Let's make sure it doesn't spread anywhere. While we can, if we can cut off internet access to the host and cut off all other network access, fantastic, right? And then let's see what we can do when we investigate in here. Cool. All right, Thomas, let's do it. Let's jump into what Cove is.
Dive into a bit of a demonstration. No worries. Let me share out my screen and you guys let me know when you can see it. That looking good. Yep. Fantastic. All right, so this is the Cove dashboard. I won't I won't spend forever telling you what everything in here does. It's actually fairly self-explanatory for anyone who's worked with a lot of backups, right? You've got a navigation pane on the left. We've got some nice pie charts at the top telling us how everything's going, and we've got all of our individual devices, and you can also see 365 tenancies in here and their current backup status, right? So we can see their last 28 days of backups. You know, we maybe have some, this one restarted during a backup. We might have had a failed backup here and there, right? Just an easy bird's eye view of our current environment. So let's run through a few different types of restores that we might have. I think we'll start with the first one. If we go back through those sort of types of data loss that we can have, the first and the easiest one, it's almost worth skipping, but it's probably the single most common type of restore as well, is just someone's gone and deleted some files, right? It's not the ones that keep you up at night, but it is a lot of time spent. So if that happens, what we would do is we would drill down on one of our machines. Right? So in this case, I've chosen one to open up before, and we would go to the restore tab of that device. From here, we give it a sec to load up. Fantastic. We can choose the time we're restoring to. So again, 9 out of 10 times, this is going to be as close to the failure without having failed as possible. In this particular case, I'm only taking one backup of this server per day, so it'll be a daily thing. But I will just sort of say as a bit of an aside, with Cove, one backup a day is something we do in our demo environments where we have a few thousand sitting in a rack somewhere. But in practice, you would usually be doing hourly backups, if not 15-minute backups with Cove, and that won't cost you much in terms of bandwidth. So let's say, yeah, look, it's Wednesday, but on Tuesday, this server was fine, and on Wednesday it's not. They've gone and deleted some files from their documents. That's awesome. We just drill down on the user's folder, you know, find whatever document he's managed to delete. He lost the shortcut to his app data. Fair enough. Sweet. So we'll grab that and we will hit restore to the original location. You know, if we're chastising them, I often will go and make a new folder called "Don't Do This Again" and restore it in there. But now we'll say, no, it really wasn't his fault. We'll restore it to the original location. Now, if I was doing something a bit closer to a rollback, for example, where, you know, I wasn't really sure what files had managed to be deleted by, you know, someone wrote a script in ChatGPT to clean up their C drive and it deleted every folder, you know, made before a certain date, something silly like that, that is not silly. That's not a made up example, sadly. You know, we could actually just select everything and say
command prompt, but that's okay.
yeah, I think I might start hiding it. So we can just select everything and say skip files that haven't changed, right? So we'll restore everything back to the way it was yesterday. In this case, it's going to be very selective. It's only going to pick the files that have changed between then and now. If they're gone altogether, we'll bring them down. If they've been modified, we actually have some technology that means we don't need to bring the whole file down. We can kind of rewind that file using little delta blocks of what's changed between then and now. But that's basically going to restore the server in very short order. You know, within the minute, you'll say, cool, is that file back where I told you it is? Lovely, we're done. Fantastic.
Thomas,
so,
we do have a couple of questions in here. Before that, I just want to touch on, you mentioned the recovery point objective. This is a demo server, so you're not doing, you know, hourly backups. What sort of RPOs can we see from Cove? Is it every minute? Can I do every 10 minutes? How customizable?
15 minutes is the minimum granularity. There's obviously hacky ways to get more or less depending on what you need. But for the full, you know, we are taking like a full backup, right? And that will be hanging around for a while. 15 minutes is usually as small as anyone needs to go for most things. And we find most people will sit on about an hour. You know, without diving too deep into the technicals here, the way Cove works to have very, very low network bandwidth. You know, we've been sort of a cloud first provider. You know, longer than most, right? And a big reason we were able to do that 10 years ago before everyone had fiber to their building was we have very low bandwidth, but some of that comes in CPU usage. So if you're doing really, really, really frequent backups, you know, you kind of need to allocate a little bit of extra CPU, but once an hour is essentially no overhead once every 15 15 minutes is pretty close to no overhead on the device.
Okay.
And yeah, after that, it kind of boils down to what you guys need. I will also mention, due to the way we're sort of cloud first, unless you're really invested in keeping a local copy of the storage, that shouldn't be a consideration when you're setting up your cadence. I find a lot of people using, I won't name anyone, right, but other backup providers, more traditional ones, will have that cadence is largely dictated by how much storage they have to keep that backup. Because it costs every time they do a backup, they're having to store that data somewhere, and that starts to cost you, whether it's in the cloud or you only have so much storage on-prem. With us, the storage is included with the server license. That's 9 out of 10 times just not even a consideration. So it really should just be dictated by what you need for that server.
Awesome. Let me jump into 2 of the questions here. So we have both for Annabelle. Actually, the first one she had is, if I take a VM snapshot, is that enough to keep evidence of an attack?
I would generally so if you take a VM snapshot, right, and then you, for example, restore, something very similar to what I'm doing right now, right, where we roll back all those files that have been ransomware to the previous version, I would generally say no. That's not how I would do that for a few reasons. One is VMs and snapshots are not a backup. Everyone should have a poster on their wall that says snapshots are not a backup. That's a really good way to find yourself in trouble every now and then. And another is you kind of just don't want to be restoring on top of that server that is legitimately compromised right now, right? We don't want to just rewind the files. What we want to do is get that server back to when we think, at least, can't know anything, ask Plato or whatever, but when we think that server was fine, we want to bring that server back and have that as its own box. And then that kind of precludes snapshotting it, right? Because we can't snapshot it and then delete it and restore over the top, right? We need to have a new VM, and at that point, why snapshot this one, right? You might want to take a snapshot, but you'll still want to keep that server as it is, ideally, just sitting there, just with no network attached, if that's not obvious to everyone.
The next question she had was, this is for restoring files, what you've shown here previously. What about registry changes?
So there's no sort of native inbuilt registry edit. I mean, you can see ntuser.dat is here. I could probably do a bit of a restore if I needed to. We do take system state backups and things like that, but usually, again, that comes in as part of no, we're actually just taking this server back a notch, right? If you need to sort of do granular restores to the registry, probably, as everything suggests, you should just take one of those standard registry backups, right? I'm sure we could make it work, but I would try and avoid being in that situation in the first place, just by, make a registry backup when you're editing the registry, if you can. Brilliant. All right. So that's a files and folders restore, right? That's kind of the simplest version of a restore. Probably still, again, the most common one that you'll have to do, but not the one that keeps you up at night, right? No one really stresses that Jenny's going to delete her cat photos, and that's going to end with them getting fired. What we do stress about is a production server being down, right? So we can dive into, I guess, the simplest version of a production server being down, which is just a one-time restore, right? Now, for a few reasons I'll get into, this also isn't ideal, right? So let's say, for the sake of argument, we're doing a one-time restore because, you guys haven't had a chance to implement everything that we've talked about in this webinar yet, or it's just not a very important server, right? It genuinely is a matter of we'd love to have it there, but if it's down for a day, screw it. People will be just fine. That's where we're just going to do a straightforward one-time restore, and that's super easy. So all we need to do in here is, first things first, make sure we have a recovery location, which basically means bringing a hypervisor to the party. So ESX, Hyper-V, Azure, and we have some KVM stuff coming in, which will cover a whole lot of extra situations there. But these three still cover 95% of, frankly, IT. So we'll make sure we have somewhere to restore to, right? Which basically just involves registering that hypervisor or Azure tenant in the console. We'll go to the one-time restore tab, and we'll hit one-time restore, as you'd imagine. we'll do a Hyper-V restore, probably the most common one I see. Proxmox, for what it's worth, that, you know, when we get KVM up and running, that would probably cover that. Proxmox uses KVM under the hood. Yeah, no promises as to how that will work on the interface, but KVM is what Proxmox uses under the hood for that. So jumping onto Hyper-V. Lovely. We'll pick one of my Hyper-V servers that you saw in that recovery locations earlier. We'll pick 15. Why not? And I think we were restoring off 11 MSP. The other, yeah, 11 MSP was the one we were using before. So we'll just keep using that. Lovely. We'll go next. You can see passphrase detected. Again, a small aside here, but some of you guys might have stringent security requirements. You are more than welcome to self-manage your own encryption keys for this backup. The same caveats as always apply. If you lose them, I can't help you. I will feel just as bad as you do while you're crying on the phone, but I can't help you if you lose your encryption keys. We can also manage those encryption keys for you. So it boils down to what your requirements are there. In this case, the console is managing the encryption keys, so I don't need to do anything. I don't need to go pull that out and paste it in, so we can just hit next. Fantastic. I'm going to be restoring to Hyper-V. I could just spin it up as a VHDX if that made sense. We'll say, yep, you know, our file and folder restore from Tuesday didn't work for whatever reason, so we're going to do a full system backup from Tuesday. And I have a few options here that, you know, I'll just make sure you've seen them right. We do have the option of obviously restoring the OS disk only. That might matter if you've got sort of an important server that has a really large E drive full of SQL backups or something that you don't want to be downloading while you're getting back up and running. A lot of the time, you will want to back up the target VM because the original one's down, which is why we're doing a restore. And we just want to seamlessly have this one roll into production, right? We want to start backing this one up now because that old one, it's dead. And we do provide the ability to keep a local copy of this if we want it, right? So if I had a NAS that I'd repurposed or was just using, I could obviously pull the backup off that, which might be a little faster than my internet link. Lovely. We'll choose some VM settings, 4 cores, 4 gigs. Often you'll just want to apply whatever was there before. That's probably 9 out of 10 of them. But let's say, as is not that uncommon, right? We have an environment where we can do a restore in a pinch, but it's not necessarily as highly spec'd as our production environment, right? It's got exactly half of what the old one had. Okay, sweet. Well, I'm just going to half the requirements. Better for you guys to be running a little slowly than not running at all. Easy. Next, I'd like to receive an email when this works. Yes, Thomas at fine. And we're done. That needs to be a legitimate email, but you can imagine that we hit the go button and that's going to basically grab the backup in the cloud of that server from the date we've specified and just throw it straight into a working VM on the Hyper-V server in this case that we've selected. Right? Really easy process. You know, the greenest level one should be able to figure with very little instruction, right?
The to cover ratio for you guys, Thomas, I see pretty amazing in here.
Yeah.
You know, under 10 clicks, really.
Yeah, click to recovery ratio. That's a metric we should start using in our material. I like it. Fantastic. All right. Now, why wouldn't we want to do a one-time restore? That's a pretty reasonable question to ask. The answer is we still need to download that server. So again, if it's a server, you know, let's say we've got a pretty standard office with, I don't know, gigabit link maybe. That's much more common these days. That's fine. If I have a 300 gigabyte server, I still need to download something close to 300 gigabytes to get it back, right? Which might be on a gigabit, not too long, but still longer than we want. And if you're on an old VDSL connection in the sticks, which I'm hoping none of you guys are, but you know, again, we don't get to choose where our office is, then that could actually take quite a long time, right? We don't want to be in a position where, oh no, we've got a perfectly working version of that server, I promise, boss, but you know, it's going to take the next 3 days for me to download it. You know, he won't understand. So to avoid getting into that situation, one thing we can do is set up a standby image. And this is very much preferred to the one-time restore if you can do it. So what we'll let you do is more or less that exact same wizard, right? But in this case, we've got those recovery locations. Let's imagine Hyper-V 14 is my production server. I just grabbed an Optiplex out of the cupboard, right? I installed Hyper-V on it, called it Hyper-V 15. That's now my recovery location. Or very, very, very common, if you guys have multiple sites at your businesses, right, is to have a hypervisor on either site, which might just be the way things are already. But what we're going to do is we're going to sort of say, for Hyper-V 14, I want to have an offline copy of those servers sitting on Hyper-V 15 ready to go, and vice versa, right? So to do that, we make sure both hypervisors are added to the recovery location. We go to our standby image tab. And again, it really is more or less the exact same wizard, right? So just to keep it consistent, I'll use Hyper-V again. Lovely. We'll pick Hyper-V 15. Imagine that particular server is on Hyper-V 14. We'll pick that same server again. Convenient. Lovely. Next. Next. You can see it's exactly the same thing, but we do have a couple of little extra options here. So we're going to be restoring to Hyper-V. We're just working, you know, you need the offset for weird reasons. But we want just a working VM sitting there switched off. We might also want to do some boot checking, right? So I'm going to dive on this a little more in depth later. But one thing that is fairly easy to do is to be taking backups and not realize that those backups are no good for whatever reason, right? What we'll let you do is boot up that VM on Hyper-V 15 briefly. We'll take a screenshot of it. We'll make sure everything's fine. We'll send that report to you essentially. So you can have the confidence that, yeah, if Hyper-V 14 dies, everything that's sitting on it right now will spin up just fine on Hyper-V. Right? So let's say daily seems pretty reasonable there, especially if I have requirements for really low downtime, and everything else is more or less the exact same. But what's going to happen now is if we go back to my standby images, I'm basically just going to have a switched off copy of that particular server sitting on the other hypervisor. So if site 1 goes down, so leading into that site resiliency, site 2 can just spin up its workload in, I don't know, you guys can guesstimate how long it'd take you to jump into Hyper-V and right click, turn on a VM. Very low click to recovery ratio there, probably something like 3 or 4. Should be a very easy time. And as I mentioned earlier, we will quite happily grab you some screenshots of that VM and prove to you that it's working, which is really important. I will also say it's really important, not just because you know, it proves that the backups are working, and a lot of you guys will have business practices where testing the backups is part of something. Maybe you do once a quarter, right, or once a month even, right, where I don't know how common this is anymore, because I've been using Cove, so you know my life's a lot easier than that. But the old way we used to do it was often, you know, someone would just designate a file, and we would need to show that file to an executive once a month, saying, "Yep, that's the copy of that file from a month ago." But even then, that kind of proves that you can get a file back. It doesn't prove that you can get a full image restored in a pinch. So this gives you a lot of peace of mind, as well as cutting down any manual labor you guys are doing for the recoveries. And what it also does is, because we're basically turning off your current server and switching it on somewhere else, we're proving to you that that VM sitting there as it is now can start up, which is, you know, outside of, let's say, you know, proving our backups work, because frankly, we didn't really do. Basically seen no failures on our side for backup recovery. But what I have got, you know, very happy calls about is people getting early warning that a server that they've, say, installed updates on but haven't rebooted yet is now failing the boot check on the other side. And they can tell quite happily, okay, server right now, it's not going to come back up. Let's go investigate and figure out what's going on with that server. Thank God we had early warning. So it's a nice little feature you get there. Brilliant. Now, if you guys don't have the fully resilient sort of standby image setup, right? Like you only have one hypervisor, you can't get another one. That's fine. You know, we all have limitations in that area. We don't have unlimited money as much as we'd love to in IT. We can also do that testing for you as well. So while we don't have a full restore to our cloud yet, that's something we're looking at. We can test your backups in our cloud, right? So we're more than happy to spin them up in our cloud and grab a screen and prove to you that, yes, look, you need to do a one-time restore, or, you know, potentially a bare metal restore, which I haven't dived into, but everyone should be able to intuit what that is. Yes, this will restore quite happily. Brilliant. More questions have come through. And,
we've had quite a few actually here, Thomas. In the Q&A, not in the chat. That's it. Look, I'll highlight a few of these. We'll start with the most recent one here, or one of the most recent ones. How is AI or machine learning being used to optimize or automate disaster recovery processes?
I think in practice these days, writing those plans for people a lot of the time. In terms of how we use it in our tool, we don't really at the moment. There are some looks into tamper protection style things that, you know, are under investigation and things like that, but we're pretty straightforward. AI is not deterministic, and if there's one piece of equipment that people really want to be deterministic, it's backup. So naturally, we're going to be cautious incorporating, you know, poetry writing robots into such tooling. So, I mean, in terms of how people are using it now, I think largely it is going to boil down to a lot of people write out those big checklists with the assistance of an AI, and it can be a really useful tool for that kind of job.
I think log analysis too is going to be pretty huge for, and maybe, you know, the code I'm sure has audit logs in here for administrators. Hey, I don't have the bandwidth during a disaster to jump through all these audit logs. Let me just get Copilot or something else to have a read through this Excel spreadsheet that I have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we obviously utilize tools like AI quite heavily in, for example, our SEAM tooling, right? So we kind of separate that out from the backup a little bit. But yeah. Yes. Brilliant. All right. So I mean, there is one other type of restore that all too common these days, and I'll just make sure I've showed it to you before we dive out of the demo and answer any last questions, which is 365, right? I'll actually pick a different tenancy for that. Selfish Europeans over provision their own stuff, so it's always an easier demo. So we pick a 365 tenancy. It's all too common for you know, people to lose a mail, lose SharePoint sites, get ransomware quite a lot these days, which is just great. It's lovely to have new problems to deal with. And we also do backup OneDrive as well, which is quite important, right? And Teams. So if we need to do a restore for, let's say, someone's mailbox, we can jump into our Restore Exchange, connect to that tenancy. With that user. Brilliant. We'll pick whichever user, you know, managed to delete their whole inbox, or, you know, whatever has happened to them. We'll pick on Bram today, and we can just go through his mailbox and restore anything, right? So it's somewhat out of scope for a true disaster recovery situation here. That would obviously be much more SharePoint, which has a bit more nuance than I think I'm going to be able to squeeze in the time we have left on this webinar. But just to give you some idea of how the 365 restores look, it's very simple stuff, right? Again, pretty idiot proof. I'm always hesitant to say that because someone always finds a bigger idiot for me. But, you know, this is fairly simple stuff, right? Choose the mail, search through the mailbox, find what was missing, choose where we need to restore it to, and away we go. So, as, you know, unpleasant truth, but I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware, you know, a lot of these mailbox restore requests actually come from HR asking us, hey, can you restore some mail to my mailbox? That's obviously something we can also do through here. Fantastic. All right. So in the Q&A section, were there any other questions I should touch on before we dive back into the slide deck?
There are some good ones in here. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll tie them into the end here of the deck, just conscious of time. And here there's 1, 2, 3, 4 more slides in here we really want to jump through.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Well, I don't think I have anything else to show in the interface. Obviously, if anyone wants a deeper dive, you have our contact details. We're more than happy to go through it in more depth with your specific situations, which can change things up quite a bit. But I think we'll leave it there.
Absolutely. Let me just pull this back open. Give me just a second. So the new scenarios, Thomas, we've talked about hardware failures. That's a classic one in here. Site loss, whether it's fire or flood, those disasters are still there. They're the old school ones. Then there's the new style of disaster, ransomware as well. So then there's the and you have the classics up here, the failures.
Yeah.
You know what? When the phone rings, are you ready to respond in here? It might not be the phone, it might be an email ringing, but show of hands
Hang on, Teams.
in here. Teams notification as well. Hey, look who has their DR plan scheduled already. Let's just go ahead and answer in the chat. If anyone has a written disaster recovery plan in place, yes or no.
Pretty quiet.
It is. It must be.
I think we need some brave no's to dive in there to warm everyone else up, because the yeses.
I cut out there for a second. A little mini disaster.
Yeah.
Thomas, I say the same. Can you put your
Microsoft using Teams? Brilliant.
I'd assume you'd have a yes for this, Thomas.
Oh yeah. Well, everyone that we've worked with closely is a yes. When we go through and sort of onboard them and help them set up, yes, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Now,
all right.
What's the difference between Cove and I guess other backup products in here? And I know we put this together kind of yesterday. We haven't touched much on true deltas in here, which is kind of a differentiator for you guys. But Thomas, what's a true delta?
So the way we do backups, there's sort of two, let's say, crudish ways of doing backups, which almost everyone does. Is either, let's say, crude file and folder, right, where you have an Excel spreadsheet. We take a backup of that spreadsheet. Then you edit that spreadsheet. It detects that spreadsheet has changed and backs up the new copy, right? Serviceable, right? But obviously we're backing up a new copy of that file every time it changes. The other way of doing it is much more like native block-based backups, which boil down to disk blocks, which are usually something like 4 meg, I think, on most modern file systems, which means, we're looking at the whole hard disk for that server, be it virtual or otherwise, right? And if a block changes, we back up the new block or store that change. But again, you're backing up a whole lot of overhead because A, blocks move around all the time. And B, the minimum size you're going to get is whatever the block size of that file system is, or that disk. What we do is we sort of do a hybrid of both, where we are technically a file and folder backup, right? We look at a file, we see that it's changed, but what we do from there is we break every file that we're backing up down into 256 kilobyte blocks, and we only back up into our new journaling files the individual blocks that have changed, right? So if you add a new slide to your PowerPoint, right, and it's, I don't know, a meg, right, then we will pretty close to exactly only back up 1 meg, right? We're never going to back up the full PowerPoint. And if you change one line of a PowerPoint, we'll probably be backing up, a matter of kilobytes. And over a whole server's usage, right? Like when we're talking about a largish file server, right? I actually have some data from one of our old Austin file servers. And you're looking at sort of a 6 terabyte standard file server, where if you're using sort of a classic image-based backup, they will often look at something like 5-ish%, 10-ish% sometimes, depends a bit on the workload, of that total space, right? You're looking at gigabytes of backups every time you want to back up that server. Whereas with us, it's often down to far less than a gigabyte, right? Because people are editing files. They're not creating large new files all the time. What they're doing is they're collaborating on Word documents and things. And so we just get a very, very small amount of data that actually ends up needing to go to the cloud. And another big one is that just for more complicated technical reasons, it's very resilient, right? You would have seen there were a couple of failed backups in my dashboard in the last 28 days, but you didn't see big long chains of failed backups, right? Which is why you often get, I'm sure the word broken chain again causes a lot of flashbacks in the audience. Where something goes wrong and then the subsequent backups are going to keep failing because there's this failure point. We might need to reseed the whole thing. Whereas with us, if it broke for whatever reason on that day, it'll probably just work tomorrow. It gives you a lot of peace of mind there, right? If it's failing all the time, it's almost always something very self-explanatory, right? Like you've told your EDR to kill our backup agent. It's something pretty on the nose 9 out of 10 times. Now you can see also looking through the rest of this checklist, just again being wary of time. All of our data, at least for Australia, is going to be in Equinix in Australia. So it's all onshore data, which is obviously a big requirement for a lot of people. If you do have an office in the EU and they can only keep their data in the EU, that's also fine, actually. You can say these servers, their data is not allowed to leave the EU. You'll still have one nice, easy management interface and you can manage that. But for most people, I assume it's going to be just a matter of everything's onshore in Australia in an ISO certified data center.
And I think one nice thing with you guys as well is the breadth of coverage in here. We're not dealing with 3 different backup products in here that you have to get deploy. It's all that single pane of glass in here to do server, endpoint, database, cloud backup, and even recovery to a degree in here. So I think that's a huge winning point for Enable as well, and I think why I love y'all's products so much.
Yeah, we do try to be a pretty easy one-stop shop for disaster recovery for the modern-ish workplace, right? If you've got massive Kubernetes clusters, yeah, we'll start talking about even more modern stuff, and that's a little out of scope. But for 9 out of 10 businesses, it's one pane of glass, and it's 5 clicks to get everything back.
Absolutely. Look, something exciting that we discussed with the team yesterday here. You guys have some amazing Tula backpacks and Camelback water bottles in here to get me outdoors a little more. So all you have to do is scan this QR code or go to clouddataprotect.com.au/contact us, fill in the form with your name and address, and you'll actually be emailed one of these backpacks. I might have to go fill this out myself in here because it's a pretty sweet backpack set up here. Have a little bit of a poll before we jump into any final questions. What's your next step with backup? Guys, if you could go ahead and answer in the chat in here, we'll highlight some of the answers. I'll go ahead and answer first. I'm a Cove user and want to explore continuity.
Fantastic. I'll jump on a call with you after this.
I think that is worth mentioning while we're waiting on any responses in here. And I've had a few messages during this from people wanting to organize demonstrations in here. We're more than happy to do one-on-ones to kind of walk through your scenario in here and to do different backup strategies with you as well and kind of do some of that planning. Feel free to reach out either via Cloud Data Protect or sales@virtualgraffiti.com.au and we'll be in touch actually to help schedule those demos. Everyone's shy. I think we've got to jump into Christian here has said I do not have a backup solution. So there we go. I think it's the end of the webinar and we're getting close to lunch. And here, Thomas, that's
lunchtime. Everyone's getting ready to go.
All right, Thomas, let's jump into some questions. People can sign off if they need to, and then we'll just run for 5 more minutes here.
Really?
So how do organizations prepare for increasingly complex threats like supply chain, cloud outages, or geopolitical cyber incidents?
The same way you plan for any other outage, right? You know, at the engineering level, we need to think about what's down and what do we bring back up, right? So supply chain attacks can obviously be devastating, right? So there's a whole bunch of other things we should do to, you know, try and stop that from happening in the first place. But, you know, if what brought your server down was a supply chain attack or a geopolitical incident, it ultimately, you know, may change your forensics approach, but the disaster recovery, bringing things back up, won't change that much.
Fantastic. Now, one of the other questions we had in here, just Q&A is reloading for me. Now, what are the financial consequences here of not having a tested DR plan? I remember years ago it was you know, millions per hour, and here I think it's changed slightly, but go on.
I mean, often like financial consequences is just like the business goes under. All too often, it's just the business goes under, right? You can kind of think you'll be able to wing it, but if your wing it plan isn't something you've tested, you don't know whether you can actually restore it all, right? If you haven't sort of tested it, you don't know what the plan is, like you don't know that you can restore, right? And if you can't restore for a week for whatever reason, a lot of businesses are just gone, right? Like that's kind of the end of them, depending on the severity. So, you know, it can vary entirely. You know, there's lots of servers I deal with where, you know, in certain industries, you know, we do just do the numbers and we say if this goes down, it costs us $25,000 an hour until we get it back up. We're happy with it being down for 2 hours, that kind of thing, right? That's one situation. But it obviously ranges up to like, it doesn't really matter anymore. We're all out of business.
All right, final question in here. I've got to pick one of the good ones. There's quite a few in here. Let me double check the chat. Now, let's see.
I mean, there's a good one there about should disaster recovery plans integrate with incident response or cybersecurity response plans?
Let's do that one, Thomas. Yep, and we'll end on that one.
I mean, they should overlap tremendously, right? Like a lot of your disaster recovery plans flow on entirely naturally from cybersecurity response plans, right? In a lot of cases, they're the same document. So how should they integrate? You know, when it comes down to the nitty gritties of the technicals, there should be, you know, even if you've done it 5 times, you should just have worst case, like 10 bullet points that says, here's how we do the restore if this server goes down kind of thing, right? But for anything even kind of higher level than that, they start merging into the same document almost.
There's one more, just because we have 1 minute here. What are the most reliable backup strategies for modern IT environments? We both remember the 3-2-1 rule. I think that recently became 3-2-2 rule as well. But, you know, air gapped, immutable storage. What would you guys recommend to customers in here?
I tend to say trying to have redundant hardware, but always having a plan to fall back to the cloud, right? You don't need to have a disaster recovery environment spun up, ready to go in the cloud, but always making sure that the cloud is a plan if you need to, right? One thing, you know, we can have, let's say those 2 hypervisors are ready to go, but it was a supply chain attack and loaded at the same time. I don't know. They're both from the same terrible vendor. That's cool. That's not a situation where you want to find yourself scrambling to figure out how to set up an Azure tenancy so you can restore to it, right? So you should always have a cloud stop there ready to go.
Fantastic. Thomas, I think we end there. We've used the full hour. I just want to say thank you for joining us here today and for hosting alongside myself. And then thank all of our attendees as well. Our team will be reaching out over the next couple of days in here. You know, to just do any follow-ups and schedule any demos in here as required.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Thad. It's been great speaking to everyone.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day here.